Thanks for coming to this listening session. We're very lucky that the state of Colorado has a couple representatives who you'll be meeting here shortly. We have Kristen King and Roland Hay with us tonight, who are going to give a presentation. The Citizens Against Asphalt Toxins are also here tonight, and they're going to have a presentation too, also 30 minutes, and then we're going to have time for everyone else who's interested to make comments. Obviously, this is supposed to go to around 8, so you get an idea how long the comments can be. It'd be 2 minutes or so, depending on how many people raise their hand later. So a couple things is, I want to recognize a number of people here. We have Senator Randy Fisher's here, I know, and they're Representative, sorry, I gave you a promotion. Representative Randy Fisher, and also he deserves a big round of applause because this was his last session. He'll still be in office until January, but he served well for 8 years in Western Fort Collins, basically. So let's have a round of applause for Representative Fisher. And I have not seen, I know Senator Kafalis and Representative Janelle might be here tonight, but they're not here yet. So if they come in, we'll certainly recognize them when they do. And council members tonight, we have Councilmember Overbeck here, and Councilmember Troxell. Where'd he go? There he is. And we have the Deputy City Manager here tonight, our new Deputy City Manager. Jeff, and how do we say your last name? I can't ever get it right. Yes. Oh, and I forgot to introduce me. Okay. So I'm Jerry Horak. I'm the Mayor Pro Tem. I'm here tonight because the mayor is in Des Moines, Iowa tonight. She's at the President Obama's Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Committee that she's serving on, which is made up of state, local, and tribal representatives. They're looking at this issue, so that's why she's out of town. That's why I get to stand here tonight. So we've introduced those folks. So there's a couple of things we just want to talk about, where the city is in part on this issue and where we are with Martin Marietta. And also there's a number of Martin Marietta representatives, so if you hadn't had a chance to talk to them, I'm sure they'll be around afterwards for folks who would like to speak with them here tonight. The city of Fort Collins, as you know, has been actively engaged as the CAT group got us engaged in this particular issue. And the county has, and the city, even back to, I think, last September, is when some of the first things started happening. And Melissa Hoofy is also here from her staff, who's our air quality person, so why don't you raise your hand there. She's been quite helpful in this issue for all involved. And we're very lucky to have her, because she is a very senior air quality person who was with the Bureau of Land Management in DC, actually, and she made the choice, as a lot of people do, to rather be back with her family, not move to DC, and be part of this community versus being part of the Washington, D.C. community. So we're very lucky for that. So we've been reviewing the permit, some of the things that have been occurring also, or getting ready to review the permit, learning more about it. Melissa's done a great job digging down the facts, corresponding with the state to try to understand things, try to get information out to the members of CAT and out to their distribution list. So try to have everybody with whatever information we have. One of the things we've had, as folks know, is we've had an asphalt contract with Martin Marietta for a number of years and some other companies in the area. Simply, we have a major street paving program every year. The citizens have voted for that, and it takes a lot of asphalt to do that particular program, as well as the MAX took a lot of work on that also. So we have signed a contract back at the end of March, city manager did. That contract, though, can be terminated rather quickly if there are problems that we're seeing or the permit issues, et cetera. I don't know if it's a week or days. It's a very short time frame for that contract to be terminated if there's any reason to do so. We don't, from what we've seen so far from Melissa and others on our staff looking at it, that they have been environmental compliance and their environmental practices are in conformance with the state standards. So we advocated for a public hearing that council members, the city manager, the deputy city manager, Melissa and others on our staff did that. The state was gracious enough to have a listening session up here, which this is that, and they'll tell you more about the permit process. So this is not a formal hearing tonight. So the comments that you would ever want to make, you also want to make them in writing to, when the permit comes out, to the addresses given. I'm sure they'll provide you more information, but that's very important. Tonight's an informational night, one, to get some of your concerns out, but it's not part of the review of the permit. So you have to make sure you do that when the permit's finally released inside that 30-day period. And again, they'll tell you more about that process. Excuse me. That's why I have the little cup holder here. So the other things to deal with, we've also been working cooperatively with Larimer County, especially Melissa and Lucinda Smith, who's been doing that. And on the, to look at the draft air permit and to deal with that, we've jointly with Larimer County hired a consultant to review the modeling analysis, which we all know is critical for this particular plant or any point source that you want to see what's going to happen to the pollutants as they move through the air system. As many of you were at, the City Air Quality Advisory Board held a hearing or discussion on this particular issue. They're going to be making a recommendation to the council as they're reviewing it. We have not received that recommendation yet, but they will. And the County Environmental and Science Advisory Board will advise the county commissioners, and they'll both, I'm sure, be looking at that analysis that will be done by our staff, and then that we'll be sending comments forward to also on the permit. So with that, so that was the welcome, which probably took too long. We're going to have the presentation coming up. There's a few ground rules that we're going to go over. And my major one to give you is, and Tess Heffernan, who's going to be facilitating the meeting along with me, she's the real facilitator. I'm here to sort of be the prop or something, I don't know. But is that tonight, again, I just want to emphasize, this is about sharing information. The state's going to share information, CAT's going to share information, to share opinions, to ask questions. We may not be able to get to all the answers because of the fact people are going to be speaking, but we will try to get answers working with the state and our people, those questions answered, posted on our website, and so it'll be available to people. This is also being being taped, so this program will start playing on May 19th, and we'll play a number of times over the next month or two as we try to do things like that. And so what I'm asking is to be respectful of the speakers, no matter what your opinion is about what they're saying, but to keep that to yourself. This is not about booing, cheering, catcalls. You can certainly, if there's speakers who want to, things like so many people are in support, to raise hands, that's fine. That's not an outburst. And to be very respectful of our guests here in our community tonight. And again, you'll have that opportunity to give your final input during the hearing process. So I'll turn it over to Tess.
Thank you, Jerry. I wanted to just cover a couple more logistics first, and I apologize for any of our Spanish-speaking attendees, because probably should have done this before and I didn't think about it. But we do have, Ana Arias is here, and Ana can help interpret. So Ana, let me give you this.
Sí, buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Cualquiera de ustedes que necesiten interpretación, por favor, nada más alcen la mano y voy a donde están ustedes. Gracias.
Thank you. Let's see here. I think Jerry covered a pretty good list there. So let me go on to the agenda. So as he mentioned, this is a quick welcome. And don't worry, we're not going to cut the major portion of the agenda times. We may end up going a little bit past 8 if we need to. But we have about 30 minutes for our guests from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Then we have 30 minutes for our guests from the Citizens Against Asphalt Toxins. Then we're planning to allow 60 minutes for the folks in the audience to come up to the microphones. We'll give you a little bit more about how we're going to manage that when we get to that point. And then we'll just take up a couple minutes to wrap up, to reiterate how this information will be disseminated. One thing I'd like to point out, if there's anybody that needs to leave early, one of the things that we've done is we have some printed cards that are on the table outside from when you came in. And if you need to leave early, or, and I'll repeat this, if you're not a person that loves to come up in front of a microphone and talk to a crowd of people, you are welcome to put your questions or concerns on those cards and submit those as well. And they will go into the package of information that's taken by our folks here tonight. Okay, as mentioned, we've got just a few ground rules we want to ask you to honor. If you would, hold your comments during the presentation and while other people are speaking. We do intend to leave some time at the end so that if you have questions that you ask, that we can, if we see some themes and some very common questions, we're thinking we might just massage it so at the very end our speakers can come back up and answer some of those questions. Again, we're going to kind of play it by ear and just see how it works for folks so we get the best possible experience here for everybody. Respect others. I think Jerry covered that very well. One of the things that I think it's important to remember here is that everybody is here for a good reason. You all have very closely held values, whether you're interested in public health, and that's what you do for a living, or your family, your home, your neighbors. We're all here because we care about this community. So I would hope that we can all have respect for each other's viewpoints while we're here. And to that, the last ground rule is assume good intent. If we start from that place, then we should be able to have a pretty healthy conversation here tonight. So those are the ground rules we'd ask you to honor. We will turn it over to our friends from the CDPHE. I just like that I know that acronym. Again, it's Kirsten King and Roland Hay, so I'll turn it over to you.
My name is Roland Hay, and I'm the Permitting Section Supervisor for the Air Pollution Control Division at CDPHE. And I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I know this is probably stuff you maybe haven't routinely dealt with, and I understand that sometimes our processes are kind of complicated and somewhat obtuse, but what I'm going to try to do is kind of take you through some basics of how we do air permitting. So with that, and then I'm going to do about half the presentation, and then Kirsten's going to pick up the second part about the public participation element. So in terms of air pollutants, there's some kind of key air pollutants that we regulate. And without going into a lot of detail, we regulate something called particulate matter, and that comes in several different forms, dust and other kinds of particles. We regulate combustion gases, so anytime you burn a fuel, you generate the gases you'll see up there to varying degrees, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide. Those all result from burning of fuel, of fossil fuels, and then from other types of industrial processes as well. Volatile organic compounds, or they're called VOCs. Those come from a variety of sources, things like solvents, a lot of VOCs emitted in the oil and gas operations. You've probably been seeing some of those issues up here as well. They're really across the state. I know a class of pollutants that are of particular interest are hazardous air pollutants. There's 187 of them. They're identified by the federal government. They're also called air toxics as well. So those are specific individual compounds, things like benzene or toluene, xylenes, formaldehyde, things like that, that the Federal Environmental Protection Agency is designated as being particularly toxic and something that needs to be regulated. And then finally, in the last few years, we've started regulating greenhouse gas emissions related to climate change. And those primarily come in the form of carbon dioxide, which, once again, anytime you burn a fuel that has carbon in it, you're going to release carbon dioxide, and then also methane, which we see a lot of in the oil and gas arena. So basically, we're responsible for issuing air permits. So good question, what is an air permit? Well, it's a document that authorizes the legal emissions of certain pollutants within certain conditions. Our permits define what pollutants are emitted and at what levels. It also identifies the steps the facility has to take to control or reduce their emissions. And finally, there's a lot of language that discusses how a facility is going to monitor that and report information and effectively how they're going to comply with what they're doing. So that's a air permit, basically a legal document that allows the emission of air pollutants. Okay, so why do we issue these permits? Well, there's a number of federal regulations. Really, everything we do in one form or another pretty much comes out of the Federal Clean Air Act that has been developed, starting in the 70s, and then it's been amended a number of times since then. And that kind of lays out all the things we do, the standards we have to meet, the types of permits we have to issue. And so in addition to those federal requirements, we've also, within the state of Colorado, adopted our state laws or statutes that govern air pollution in Colorado. We've been authorized by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to administer the program within our state. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we are working to ensure compliance with this. It's kind of a long worded term there, but National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So once again, that's why we do all of this. Okay, just to give you a little bit of a sense of how our department or our division is structured, we have a number of different permitting groups. You can kind of see up there. We have roughly, give or take, about 30 plus people working on these issues, and that's for all different kinds of permits. Once again, a lot of oil and gas development in Colorado, so we've needed to put a lot of resources there. But in addition, we have our construction permits group, and that's the group that is working on the draft permit for the Martin Marietta facility. And we also have a major source permitting group, and I'll talk a little bit about major sources, but just give you a very limited amount of information since this particular plant doesn't fall into that category. So we have a system by which we collect information from folks that are emitting pollution in Colorado. I'm not going to try to bore you with too much detail on this stuff, but basically the important takeaway is we have a mechanism by which we collect information from anybody emitting a certain amount of pollution, and those are our threshold values there. In air pollution world, we tend to measure pollution in tons per year. That's just kind of a standard unit of measure, although some of those HAPs, because there are sometimes greater concerns with those particular chemicals, we often talk about those in pounds per year. So anyway, that's the way we get information from companies like Martin Marietta. Just some of the things that we include and make people tell us about, or what they're doing, what their process is, what kind of fuel they burn, what they produce, what their estimates are for emissions, and then we require a renewal. This isn't a permit, it's really just a notification, and we require these to be renewed, resubmitted every 5 years so that we maintain current information. Okay, so how do you figure out what's coming out of a stack or off a road where trucks are driving up and down? Well, we've got a lot of various techniques. Once again, this is kind of somewhat detailed, but we have different ways of estimating what we think, how much pollution is coming out of a certain activity. We have things called emission factors. We do testing. We gather data through studies. We sometimes manufacturers of things like engines develop and will guarantee a certain amount of emissions, per horsepower of the engine or whatever. But ultimately, we use a variety of tools to figure out what emissions are. So, as I mentioned, construction permits, that's what we're here talking about tonight, and that's the type of permit we're looking at for the Martin Marietta facility. And when we say construction permit, it's a little bit of a misnomer because really we mean the permit has to be obtained before construction occurs. In the case of Martin Marietta, they had an existing permit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, and they're converting that from a portable permit to a fixed stationary permit, but essentially you have to get a permit before you engage in the activity that's going to cause the pollution. And then we have different thresholds that require permitting. And that last bullet, the permits can include computer-based modeling review, which in this case it did, and I'll once again talk more specifically about that a little bit later in my slides. And then we also have procedures for public comment and public input, which will also be occurring on this permit. So, and then just if anybody's interested, that's a picture of a cement plant down in Pueblo. So that's a very large industrial facility. We call that a major source, but that just gives you a sense of some of the types of sources we regulate. Okay, once again, I'm not going to talk a lot about this slide, but I did want to let you know we do have certain sources that are required to get additional permits beyond their construction permit, and those are called operating permits, and those apply to what a class of sources we call major sources. We have about 240 of them, or 230 of them in Colorado. There are big coal-fired power plants. There are large oil and gas facilities, big manufacturing operations. Those kinds of sources have to get permits, and then what Martin Marietta is requesting in this particular permit is to take limits so that they will fall below those 100-ton per year thresholds. And I think that's probably enough information on that slide. Okay. I also wanted to let you know we do have certain processes, and we have we're a regulatory agency, which means pretty much everything we do is driven by laws and regulations and how we implement our programs. But as part of all of that, we have certain timing requirements in terms of how fast we need to process permits. And then we also have a series of fees. So essentially, the way the program is structured in Colorado is mandated through our legislature over the years. We have to effectively pay for ourselves, meaning that the people or the companies that are emitting pollution are the ones that should be paying for the cost of the program to do the oversight and all that. So anyway, we charge a series of fees, both in terms of filing forms as well as the time we spend processing applications. And then on an ongoing basis, we also charge companies fees based on their level of emissions. So that's how we fund ourselves. When we write a permit, there are a number of different things that companies are going to need to do on an ongoing basis. So we issue this construction permit, which allows them to build and begin operating the facility, but also they will continue to operate under the conditions of that permit over time. And some of the things we require are that they properly operate and maintain their facility, that we're going to periodically inspect it. We're going to require them to keep records, and then we're also going to require them to certify that they're complying with their permit. And then, you know, if they're not, then there's a bunch of legal processes that we follow to either fine or cite folks for not complying. And then in the case, we do have contracts with local agencies throughout the state, including Larimer County, to do inspections on our behalf as well. So this slide here, just to give you kind of a sense of the universe of facilities that we regulate and we have oversight over. So we have roughly 16,000 facilities that are part of our overall program that we implement. So that's actually quite a few. And then of those 16,000 total facilities, there's a total of about roughly 35,000 emission points or emission units at those 16,000 facilities. So we have quite an extensive database on all this stuff, and we have a lot of traffic coming through our office every year. And in terms of just from a permitting standpoint, what we call permitting actions or permits, and sometimes people are exempt or don't need a permit, but we process all those requests, and we handle about 5,100 of them a year. And then, because I know people are here tonight because they're interested in the Martin Marietta Asphalt Plant, just wanted to show you, I checked our system a few days ago, and we have roughly 110 active permitted asphalt plants in the state of Colorado, and approximately a little less than half, about 45, are designated as portable, and then the rest of them are permitted at one specific location. So that just gives you a sense for kind of the universe of things we're working with. Okay, so my next couple of slides address in specific what we're doing right now is this Martin Marietta Asphalt Plant on North Taft Hill Road here in Fort Collins. So as that first bullet says, we're currently processing their application. They had a permit for the existing plant as a portable source because it's common for asphalt plants often to move around. Some of them are smaller plants and kind of follow specific road construction projects, and others just might be located at a site for a year or two to meet a particular demand and then are moved on to another place. And in fact, that's kind of the history of this particular plant that was originally permitted in '97. It's moved to different spots in the state as well as other states as well based on I assume market demands for the product. Formerly, before Martin Marietta acquired it, it was permitted to a company called Lafarge, and then Martin Marietta Materials bought their assets in Colorado, including this particular plant. So anyway, we have a rule that says if you're permitted as a portable, we're willing to do that, but then our expectation is, or our requirement is, that it can't be at one location for more than 2 years, and if it is, then it has to be re-permitted. And once again, the idea is there that if something's at a site for more than 2 years, it's really not portable anymore. We consider it to be kind of permanent at that location. So anyway, that's one of the things we're doing here. We're also updating the emission values. When the plant was originally permitted in '97, it relied on the best information available at that time, but obviously as the years go by, we hopefully get smarter about things, not always, but hopefully we do. And so anyway, we have some better information now, for example, about carbon monoxide emissions from asphalt plants, so we're taking advantage now to correct those or update those to the latest and greatest thinking and knowledge. And we also actually completed a modeling review for the plant's carbon monoxide emissions. So we have certain trigger levels that require more in-depth review. And so based on what Martin Marietta's requested for this particular plant, they triggered our threshold to do a much more intensive review for their carbon monoxide emissions. And so we conducted that, and we have a separate technical group that does just that. And so they did an analysis, and that'll be part of our public comment package when we go to a draft permit so people can review that. It's a lot of technical information, but I know, if you kind of read through it, you can kind of get the sense of what we did. And obviously, for those that are interested, they really can dig into it, and we're certainly happy to answer questions about how we do those reviews. Okay, so this is kind of a term of art, if you will, that we use in our world. We call, I think I mentioned a little earlier, we have these major sources, or sources that emit more than 100 tons per year of what we call criteria pollutants. And so that means if the plant ran full blast, every hour of the year at its maximum design rated capacity, it could actually emit a lot more than it actually will for most usages. Most folks, other than certain types of sources, don't tend to run their plants 24/7 at maximum capacity, because usually, for plants like this, there isn't enough demand. I mean, I don't know what they would do with all that asphalt that they would make. So they end up, what they do in our permits is they take limits in our permit to reduce their emissions to a level that they think, are supportive of what they need to do, but also reduce their emissions and their level of production. So we called that a synthetic miner. Once again, it's just kind of a term of art, but that's what they're applying for in this particular case. There is a federal standard, a new source performance standard, that applies to this plant. So something important to know is the federal government, through their Environmental Protection Agency, has a charter through the Clean Air Act that they have to establish standards that are protective of human health and the environment for these common pollutants, we call criteria pollutants, as well as these hazardous air pollutants. And so EPA is charged with developing those standards based on scientific information and health-based studies and things like that. And then they promulgate those standards, and then the facilities like Martin Marietta have to comply with them, and then we implement those standards in Colorado. So anyway, there is a standard now. I know several people have mentioned the standard is rather old. It was last updated in the mid-90s. So, that may be a standard the EPA chooses to update in the future, but, they have their own schedule for those things, and they have priorities, and they obviously are regulating all kinds of different things. So anyway, but we do have a standard that is currently in effect, and the plant is subject to that standard. There are also, we're looking as we draft this permit about testing and operating and maintenance requirements. So, what we've developed thus far, and we're not finished with our draft permit yet, but we're currently working on it, but we fully intend that permit to include a number of requirements for Martin Marietta to go ahead and test the plant to verify that their emissions are meeting the limits and the standards that apply. So that is a big component of our permits is the demonstration that in fact they're doing what they say they're going to do. And then, as I've mentioned a couple times now, we're working on that draft permit. I don't have a specific time frame. We obviously want to get it right. We don't want to cut any corners. We want to make sure we have done all our due diligences, and that's our responsibility. And Kirsten here in a minute is going to talk about public comment process, but one other thing to keep in mind is by the time we issue a permit to draft, a draft permit out to public comment, we believe it is going to meet all the applicable standards and regulations, or we wouldn't put it out to public comment. So it's not as much a work in progress where we think, maybe they'll meet it, maybe they won't. Under that standard, we can't issue a permit to public comment. We have to fully believe that they've demonstrated that they can meet all the standards that apply. So by the time we get to a draft permit that's out for public comment, we've done our due diligence, which isn't to say we can't make mistakes or we might not have missed something. I mean, that's why there's opportunity for public comment, but we are confident that we've written an appropriate permit by the time we get to that stage. So I think with that, Kirsten, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk more about the public participation.
My name is Kirsten King. I supervise the Stationary Sources Program for the Air Pollution Control Division. That means that I have permitting, enforcement, and inspections in my group. So if it doesn't move, I deal with it. Now, first, I want to thank you all for coming out. It really helps us to understand what the issues are, what the concerns are, and what you guys see as problems or concerns with this facility. But one of my goals here is to make sure that you all understand what we can do and what our authority is under this permit and how we can address, or whether we can address, those concerns. So it's important to me that after we finish this, that you understand that and you don't have expectations that we can't meet. So, most of these regulations come from our statute, which is 25.7.114.5, in case anybody wants to read that. It is available on the web. Feel free. That establishes our application review and public comment process. It provides for the ability for us to send things out to public comment and to receive public comment. It also establishes what types of activities need to have a construction permit. Now, there are a number of different permit types, as Roland mentioned. This falls under the construction permit process. So when you go through that statute, this is a construction permit. It allows us to look at things that warrant public comment. Synthetic miners are one of those things. Significant public interest is another reason we would send something out to public comment, because we want to be able to hear what concerns are revolving around a facility. That's important. So as we move forward, this will be published in a newspaper. It will also be up on our website. It'll be published in the newspaper for a day, but we will be sure to let folks know when it goes out to public comment so that you know it's there, and it will be available on our website for the entire 30 days. And please remember that the comments that you give tonight won't roll over into that process, so please, when it goes out for public comment, be sure that you also provide us with your comments during that public comment period. We want to be sure that those are on record. Prior to anything going out to public comment, we review the permit application, we go through the process, we look at the emissions that source is going to generate, we go through and do a technical and regulatory analysis, making sure that we identify any regulations that source is subject to, any emissions limitations that need to be included in that permit, anything at all that needs to be in that permit. We would go through and prepare the draft permit, again, going back through, making sure that everything is covered, and then once that draft permit is complete, that's what's going to go out to public comment. So you're going to see a permit that we've looked at, we've worked on, and that we, again, as Roland said, believe that it is going to meet the majority of the regulations. Now, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't miss something or that there isn't a concern that you would voice that we might be able to address. And then we publish that public notice in the newspaper. Again, we're going to look at the air quality modeling, we're going to look at any applicable emissions limitations, and monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. A lot of times for folks that are close to a facility, that monitoring, record keeping, and reporting is very important to them. Emission limitations. Again, those are usually dictated by the regulations that we have, either federal or state. And so we would look at whether that permit is going to meet or ensure that facility is going to meet those emission limitations and requirements. Now, the next couple of slides are going to go through some of the things that we can look at and some of the things that we can't look at. So, some of the things that we have no ability to look at as part of a permitting process are whether a facility belongs in a certain area based on zoning. That's something that we just don't have a way to do that under our permitting process. We look at whether that facility is going to meet state and federal air emissions regulations. We can't look at any non-air quality permitting issues. So water quality, hazardous waste, they would need a permit for those kinds of things. It has to be an air quality issue for us to look at it. the type of facility, the process, the fuel type. We don't tell a source or facility what kind of process they need to do to create their product. We don't tell them what kind of fuel they need to use. But what we do is take a look at that process and that fuel choice to make sure that they will be in compliance with federal air emissions requirements and state air emissions requirements. So those are the things that we look at to make sure, and the type of fuel and process relate to that, but we don't dictate those. We can't address perceptions about the company. A lot of times we hear that this company has a bad reputation. That's not something that we can look at, but what we do is we make sure that the permit is addressing those emissions and those issues. We follow that up with inspections and, if necessary, enforcement to make sure that that company is complying with that permit. We also don't look at regulations that aren't currently in effect. A lot of times you hear, well, somebody's going to work on a regulation. There's going to be a regulation coming. That doesn't get rolled into a permit. However, if, for instance, EPA were to promulgate a regulation later that included existing sources, that would apply to that source, whether it was in that permit or not. But the regulation itself would have to apply as it's promulgated. What happens next? We're going to complete our draft permit. As Roland said, we don't have an exact time frame on when that'll be complete. When it is complete and goes up to public comment, we'll notify the city. We'll put it up in the newspaper, and it'll be on our website. If there are other ways that you need to hear about that, let us know. We also have a website that you can sign up to get notifications of all the permits that go to public notice. So if you're interested in this particular one, you might want to sign up, keeping in mind that after this process is done, you might want to unsign up so you don't hear about every permit that we issue. But that would be another way. We will hold a written 30-day public notice process. During that 30 days, we accept written comments on things like, are the emissions from this facility accurate? Is proper monitoring, record keeping, and reporting being done? Is it complying with federal and state regulations? Those are the kinds of things that we can act on and would look at for a permit process. And then we would revise the permit as necessary. We do respond to the comments that we receive in writing. So we will respond to the comments that you provide us. And then we would take final action on the permit. That would be either issuing that permit or denying that permit, keeping in mind that there are certain requirements under the statute around when we must issue a permit. And now I'm going to go through some of those. 25.7.114.5 again. This is section 7A, and there are a number of subparts. Keep in mind, if you're going to look at this, that this is a construction permit, not a renewable operating permit. So I'm going to touch on the pieces that would be applicable to this type of permit. So we have to issue the permit if we determine that the source or activity will meet all applicable emission control regulations and regulations for the control of hazardous air pollutants. Now, those have to be regulations that are in effect, regulations that are written. So we would look at both state and federal regulations for the control of hazardous air pollutants and see what was applicable to that facility. If we feel that that source is going to meet all of those regulations, we have to issue that permit. We also need to look to see whether the source or activity will meet all the applicable ambient air quality standards and all the applicable ambient air quality regulations. Again, existing regulations. So we would look at the regulations currently on the books, both state and federal, as would apply to this type of source. If that source is going to meet all of those regulations, then we have to issue that permit. We have the APCD website. Once the permit is up for public notice, you'll be able to find the permit and the technical documentation that goes along with that permit on that website. You can sign up to receive our public notices. You go to the APCD website, click on public notices, and click on subscribe to receive public notice updates. Now, keep in mind that you will get a notice for every permit in the state that we send out for public notice. Again, you might find that interesting. You might feel like we're spamming you. So, if you're interested in this particular permit, go ahead and sign up and just weed out the stuff until this permit shows up, and then you can unsubscribe, so you don't have to perpetually receive all of the notices. Our job is not to spam you.
I'm going to take a leap here and guess that folks would like a copy of your PowerPoint. Okay, so we'll work through Melissa to make sure that gets emailed out, and I know you guys have a lot of email connections, or is there a better place? Can we put it on the city's website? Okay, so we'll make sure that that PowerPoint gets on the city's website, because if you're like me, you probably weren't following all those statute numbers. We will go on now to our next speaker for Citizens Against Asphalt Toxins, and Dr. Kevin Pass. I have a slide with your name.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, a bit of a special thanks to Jerry Horrock and Bob Overbeck, both city councillors. And it's really because of them, I think, that mainly this meeting is taking place. They take a great interest in the citizens of this city, and we're very lucky to have them as councillors. I'd also like to thank you both very much, Kirsten and Roland. They're obviously very nice people, very sincere with what they're doing at CDPHE. Doesn't mean I agree with everything, but they're very sincere about it. So this asphalt plant was brought into Fort Collins in 2011, and we didn't know about it. I'm talking about the neighbourhood. The first thing that we knew about it, in fact, was when some of the neighbours started to get watery eyes, all types of asthmatic type symptoms, and they thought at first that maybe it was the roads being resurfaced. And it took quite a time to determine where the smell was actually coming from. So we determined it was coming from that area, and we couldn't quite believe that we were never told about it. This thing had just arrived as if from Mars, dropped down there. And it was in contrast to my own experience, where I was lucky enough to build a house last year. I finished it last May. And to build that house, I had to submit plans to the county. They came back covered in red ink, and there was lots of changes, and they inspected it 25 times, I think, before it went up, the insulation, the basement, the lights, everything. And finally, I finished my house. It does seem rather strange that the plant arrived with a lot less fuss than building a house. And may I ask, is there a Larimer County Commissioner in here tonight? No, there isn't. Now, that's somewhat in contrast to the city councillors. This plant is actually in Larimer County. And ultimately, whether the plant is moved or not is really going to be a political decision. Reading between the lines between what's been said tonight, the permit will be issued. Now, the public will try and speak about it, but the chances are that it's going to go through. So the only way really it's going to be stopped is by the Larimer County Commissioners using the powers of the land use. And I urge you all to look out for the emails we're going to send, to go onto the CAT website, to be part of that political process, because that's the only way we're going to stop this thing. So here it sits, a real beauty, right next to the trail there. And within 2 miles of it, there's 7,000 residents, 2,500 school children, and the poor kids at Lincoln Middle School are only half a mile away, just downwind. And if you do run down the trail, and they're cooking at the time, and your lungs are wide open, you'll get a real dose of it as you go past just 290 feet away. If we look at the mission of CDPHE, this is from their website. The main thing is to protect the air quality in Colorado. That's the main mission. Unfortunately, quite frankly, our guests aside here, I don't think they're doing a great job of this, as I'll explain later. This is from one of their brochures, the Hot Asphalt Explanation, and This states quite clearly that most HMA plants are inspected every 3 to 5 years, while the others are inspected annually. If someone doesn't comply, they're going to be fined. So let's just summarize that. Inspection every 3 years and permit renewal every 5 years. Now this particular plant, as Roland said, was made in 1997. Now, Martin Marietta have a habit of calling it a really up-to-date plant. Well, I've got news for you folks. If there's anybody in here driving a car that's 17 years old, it's a jalopy, okay? And this plant is really an old plant. It's not an up-to-date plant. So it's been all over the place. It's been across Colorado. It's been into Nebraska. It had a violation back in 2003. And the records show, in fact, that from 2000 to 2013, this plant was never inspected by CDPHE, not once. Now, they visited it apparently in 2003 for an opacity violation. The last time the permit was renewed on it was 2007. It was in New Mexico. The plant couldn't be inspected. So they rolled over the permit from before. So the next inspection renewal for the permit should have been 2012. 2010, the plant was in Arizona, and then finally it dropped on our doorstep in 2011. But there was no permit. The inspection didn't take place. And when people from CAT started to complain to the county, suddenly that's when it was inspected, going back to June 2013. So this plant is still operating now, 3 years later. As Roland said, a portable source is normally only allowed to operate for 2 years. When the inspector looked at the plant in June 2013, they noted on the inspection that it had already been operating for 2+ years. So it had already exceeded the limit for a portable plant at that time. There's the actual regulations on the construction permit, not to remain in any one site for more than 2 years. Now, we contacted Martha Rudolph, the head of the CDPHE, about this, and they said this was just a minor technical violation, which I can quite understand, but let's just follow this story a little bit further. We also wanted to know what sort of production records have been kept of the plant. Unfortunately, from 2000 to 2013, nobody seems to be able to tell us what the production of the plant was. Now, you might say, well, what doesn't matter? Well, it matters because production is related to pollution and toxins. So if you don't know how much it's being produced, how do you know how much in the way of emissions has taken place? So let's recap here. The plant moved right next to schools and neighborhoods. It's operated at least a year without an up-to-date permit. One of my biggest personal concerns is the proximity of this to Lincoln Middle School. I don't have children there, but I've had the experience of seeing children in cancer hospitals, and it's not a pretty sight. So the EPA recommends keeping this type of source well away from schools. Lincoln Middle School was built in 1974, and at that time it was an ideal environmental location. They'd never built that school next to an asphalt plant. Now, obviously, there are many limitations in what CDPHE can do. I understand that. But Martin Marietta is a large, very wealthy company, $1.8 billion turnover, about $100 million profit a year. They didn't bother to check if there was any problems at that school in terms of VOCs and all the other toxic compounds the plant emits. And if you happen to live in an area, a very industrial area of the United States, maybe Houston, if you're going to build a new school, the EPA recommends the grounds are very, very thoroughly tested for all types of toxins before you ever build it. They want to know the kids are safe. How did this plant get there? This is where the land use comes into it. In 1985, there was a special review granting right for an asphalt plant next to the gravel pit that exists there. And in fact, as far as we can tell, we've looked at it very carefully through the state, through the county. Although that permission was granted, no asphalt plant was ever on that site. And the amended special review that took place in 2009, this is at Larimer County Commissioners, they decided to change the location of the asphalt plant. Well, I think it's pretty difficult to change the location of something that doesn't exist. So prior to 2011, there was never an asphalt plant on Taft Hill Road. There's no evidence there ever was one in the county or state records. And there's no visual evidence. This is a photograph. We've been over it very carefully from aerial photographs. It must have been an invisible asphalt plant if it was there. Other parts of this land use stated these statements here. Proposed, it should be in harmony with the neighbourhood. It is not anticipated to have substantial adverse effects on property in the vicinity and will not be detrimental to public health in the vicinity. Now, one of the commissioners told us when we talked to him about this initially that it was just like living next to a pig farm, the smell. Well, last time I checked, pigs don't give out benzene, formaldehyde and toluene and all the other VOCs. And every one of you in this room has got a right to contact the commissioners and tell them what you think of their land use ideas. Obviously, this was recommendations from staff, but I don't know how the staff determined that it was no public safety problems with it. Let's just recap at where it is. It's about 0.34 miles from Solar Ridge and half a mile from Lincoln Middle School. And Lincoln Middle School sits directly from the windward side of the plant. So when the wind blows, mainly from the northwest, it blows it towards that school. And the tops of the stacks are actually in line with that school. If you look at the topography, and this is maybe a question for our guests, is whether that is really being looked at by the CDPHE. The topography means that as those stacks emit, the smoke goes directly in line with those neighbourhoods and that school. So one of the other things I'd ask the City Council also to consider is this plant, what it's doing, it's cooking oils and very flammable substances. When you get home tonight, Google asphalt plant fires. There's an awful lot of them. It's probably not a question of if it'll burn, it's when will it burn. Now, when it catches fire, what's the plan for evacuating the neighbourhood? What's the plan for evacuating the kids from Lincoln Middle School? Because we're talking about toxins at the moment on a minor level compared to what this will be if it catches fire. The CDPHE have sent us the initial modelling for the plant, and this red circle here is situated around the baghouse stack. This is where most of the emissions are coming from. From the centre of the red circle over to here, which is Taft Hill Road, is 87 metres. There are national air quality standards. Roland mentioned this. And in 8 hours, the national air quality standard is 10,000 micrograms per metre cubed. Now, the model that we have at the moment shows us that at 475,000 tonnes, right on the property edge, it's virtually 10,000 micrograms per metre squared. So they're having a real problem squeezing this plant into too small a spot. It's in the wrong place, obviously. Now, if we go into the next slide, what's interesting is that the permit they're operating on now, which they've operated on for 3 years, is for 600,000 tonnes. Now, I'm not a great mathematician, but I know that's 20% more than 475,000 tonnes. So effectively, at the moment, that red circle already encompasses Taft Hill Road, already encompasses the bike path. So they're operating on a permit that actually allows them to break national air quality standards for carbon monoxide. If that's not an infringement of public health, I don't know what is. Now, we have some concerns. None of us in CAT are professional air quality people. We look at the literature and we try and understand it. And maybe these are questions that Roland will be able to answer later. But there's certainly questions in our minds that CDPHE's mathematical model was modelled with a bias towards winter. Now that seems to us to be very strange. Nobody makes asphalt in the winter, but winds are greater in the winter. There is more dispersion of pollutants in the winter. It was modelled as a non-arid climate. Now, where I come from, this seems pretty arid. I think if you look it up in a book or Google it, it's considered an arid climate. Now, that's significant because the more moisture you've got in the atmosphere, the more settling of the contaminants there's going to be. And then it's also modelled as rural. I don't know how rural it can really be, otherwise we wouldn't be having this meeting here. It is rural to the north, but when the wind's blowing, it's urban. That's what the problem is. They also took a background sample from downtown Fort Collins as the background level of carbon monoxide when they were doing this test. Obviously, there's always a certain amount of carbon monoxide in the air. So when they have a plant releasing more, that's how they arrive at that 10,000 micrograms per meter squared. But the problem is with that the west side of Fort Collins is the side with the biggest pollution problems already. If you look at ozone for the past 30 years, the side of Fort Collins that actually is out of compliance is the red line, and that is based at the end of LaPorte towards Horsetooth. And we are more often out of compliance there with ozone levels, according to national air quality standards, than anywhere else in Fort Collins. Well, logic dictates that if the ozone's high there, then the carbon monoxide must be high there too, because those gases are getting trapped because of inversion. So, in many respects, if you had to situate a plant like this, they couldn't have picked a worse place. They picked the wrong side of town, and they picked a hollow. So it's got everything going against it. The other odd thing about the CDPHE model to us is it doesn't include the truck traffic. Now, we understand trucks don't emit so much in the way of carbon monoxide as a car does, possibly. But they emit a tremendous amount of particulate matter, 10 grams per mile of nitrous oxide, 0.22 grams per mile of PM2.5. So those are the types of particles that get deep down into your lungs and cause you the problems. So that truck traffic, this asphalt isn't going to get out of there by magic carpet. It comes in and out by trucks. They took the sample from downtown Fort Collins, and I think this could well be a mistake. I think you might find if the ozone's higher on our side of town, so is the carbon monoxide level. And last week, just to see how many trucks were going into and out of this facility, we did our own survey. And quite frankly, it shocked me. I didn't realize there'd be this many trucks going in and out. 308 truck trips into that plant and out of it. Now think about that for a moment. Think about how much in the way of pollution is being emitted by those trucks. And as they start and stop up the hill at Taft Hill, how much it gives out. That's a tremendous amount of additional pollution that hopefully that CDPHE will be able to take into account when they're modelling this, because I don't think it's being taken into account at this time. With no disrespect to our guests tonight, we have grave concerns about the relationship between CDPHE and companies like Martin Marietta. Going back to 2001, asphalt plants were considered major polluters. Due to politics, they got taken off that list. This is a letter from the CDPHE to the Colorado Asphalt Association, basically saying, congratulations guys, you're off the hook, go ahead and pollute. I don't think that's the realm of an organization like this. You know, if the IRS comes to visit you, you better be worried, because they're going to be looking very closely at what you're doing. I suspect when some of the guys turn up from CDPHE, Martin Marietta break the beer out because they've got such a close relationship. Our concern is that the CDPHE have somewhat forgotten their mission here. It's to protect the air in Fort Collins and the rest of Colorado. So this plant is a minor synthetic plant. And let's see what that means. There's 15 tons of VOCs permitted from this plant. That's benzene, toluene, formaldehyde. All those types of compounds are carcinogens. 16.5 tons of NOx. NOx will create ozone. 11.4 tons of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide. It's a real cocktail. What happens to these materials? Well, you put the VOCs and the NOx together and a bit of sunshine, we get plenty of that in Colorado, and we end up with the ozone, which is one of the reasons we're out of compliance. In fact, Many of you may have seen this, that Fort Collins got the dubious distinction of being the 22nd worst city in the United States for ozone levels. What does ozone cause and these particulates? Well, it'll cause asthma for one thing. This is apart from the carcinogens. And the advice from the National Resources Defence Council is take any steps you can to ensure new schools and housing are not near industrial areas. Well, that's the way we had it before these guys turned up. EPA themselves have a little motto. It's good up high, bad nearby. Those are the sort of things that ozone does to people. There's 25 million Americans with asthma. 3,000 die each year. There's no cure. I bet all of you know someone with asthma. You might even have it yourself. Martin Marietta, as an example, are always saying, well, you know, we haven't got any more land. We can't move this plant. Well, if you look at it, in 17 years, it's been moved over 20 times. This plant is portable. It could be moved quite easily. But they're concerned about the economic hardship that will have on this company. We also must think about the economic hardship that this has on people. 10 million lost school days, 14 million lost work days, 2 million ER visits. And I'll particularly draw your attention to the last one. 30% of childhood asthma is due to environmental exposure. So we're going to put this plant and all the trucks right next to a community, right next to a school. So take any steps you can to make new schools and housing not near industrial areas. That's what we need to do. Fort Collins has been out of attainment for ozone for the last 6 years. And the site at LaPorte Horsetooth is the one that's most frequently out of compliance. The question is why? It's pretty simple, really. It's inversion. The foothills tend to trap the air against them, and you get a coal layer that traps the pollutants down low. So I think, as Roland well knows, he can model it till forever, but you can't take into account all of these things. We've got inversion already. They've put it in a hollow. So on a calm, cool morning in Fort Collins, the pollutants start to rise, but they can't go anywhere. The stacks aren't high enough anyway, and they're trapped. And then you get a bit of a breeze, and it blows the pollutants gently towards Lincoln Middle School. That's the reality. Now, we can model this all we like, but at some point, you've got to say, common sense dictates you don't experiment this way with children. So when I look at CDPHE, I feel that the plant is located in the wrong place because of inversion. The modeling doesn't address the wind direction. It doesn't address the truck traffic. And when I say we need new leadership at CDPHE, I'm not talking about our guests tonight. I'm talking about the people higher up the tree. Basically, I don't know whether it's a lack of resources, but they really haven't been monitoring this plant at all well. And is that likely to change in the future? They have many, many other fish to fry. And once the heat goes off, my concern and our concern is, will this be properly monitored? Now, Martin Marietta, in their statement to shareholders, mentioned a couple of things. They have environmental risk due to substances that are hazardous. And the company frequently acquires large tracts of land so they can be situated a good distance from surrounding people. Now, Larimer County is huge. There is land for sale within a few miles of that plant. They could move it if they really want to, if they really care. Now, there is another plant here, the Connell plant. Many of you may see it out on I-25. The nearest neighborhood to that is at least a mile away to the west. And the wind really never blows the pollutants that way. They've got miles and miles of space around them. So this year, the city council really were between a rock and a hard place. They had road work to do. They've got to get the asphalt from somewhere. But I'd ask the city council to talk to Connell for next year and see if they can up their production and buy the asphalt from somewhere else other than the plant that's in the wrong place. So What I would like to see and what Kat would like to see on all of these plants, not just the one that's placed on Taft Hill, is we'd like to see stack testing for all relevant pollutants, including VOCs and heavy metals, on an ongoing basis. Not once a blue moon, but all the time. Limited hours. You know, we understand there can be certain emergency situations. We've had disasters, we need to rebuild those roads. But sometimes that's used as a convenience to get more production hours out of the plant and therefore produce more toxins. Require an EPA-compliant opacity monitor at all times. We've got the technology to do that cheaply. This could be watched at all times. We don't know if they're out of compliance. They're not going to tell us. And publicly accessible website for video monitoring to make sure that they're doing the things they should. There's a lot of what they call fugitive emissions, where asphalt dust can blow away when it should be watered down, for instance. We don't know that's being done. We already know from Roland Kirsten that they've got many, many places to monitor. So we need to have it monitored electronically. These types of things are not that expensive these days. Every conceivable pollution control should be on that plant and every other plant, and not in 2020 when the board in New York decide, but now. We are very concerned about the record keeping at CDPHE. I won't bore people with it, but we went in there and asked for the records under the Freedom of Information Act. It took them 2 weeks of prevarication to provide them. And when we got them, we said, is this all of them? Yes, they said. And then another month went by and wow, they found a whole bunch more of electronic records. Well, we know that the people in this city, like Melissa, like Doug at the county, are very, very conscientious in their jobs. We'd like to see local control and local record keeping of that type of thing on an ongoing basis. But most of all, we'd like a specification in future, and this is again a political thing rather than CDPHE thing, that these plants are not located close to schools and populated areas. Traditionally they weren't. They were near quarries, they were out of town, they were much smaller than this plant. The average asphalt plant is probably 200,000 tons. This thing is a monster compared to them. Finally, what I'd like you to remember is that what all this is about really is that the safety of our children. Lincoln Middle School is only half a mile away. And I'd say to everybody in this room, and the people from CDPHE as well, that if you can't put your hand on your heart and say to yourself, those children are completely safe, I've got no worries about them being there for 5 years, breathing in this stuff, and you wouldn't mind your grandchildren and children going there, then don't expect other people's children to go there. This plant needs to be moved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all our speakers. We will open the meeting up for other folks in the audience who would like to raise a question or air a concern. I wanted to also just make a note, Ross Caniff, I want to introduce you, a council member, snuck in during the last presentation. I hope I didn't miss anybody else. Okay, so for the questions and concerns, we're going to run this like we do city council meetings. For those of you who've watched those, we've got 2 microphones, one here, one here. We're going to ask you guys to line up, come on up here, get in line so we can keep going back and forth.
Because I call this the let's get in line rule. I've tried to do it city council, which is so we don't have people laying in the weeds. So everyone who wants to speak, either line up here, over there, or over here. Then we can tell for sure how many people want to speak, because here's the rule. If you're not in line, you don't get to speak tonight. You can write something on a note card, but you don't get to speak. So we just be sure how much time to allocate for this particular time. And again, you do not have to use whatever time's given. If, whatever you want to say, you've done it, that's fine. So, yes, I would agree. Based on this, we have something else, but
If we go with 3 minutes, then we can leave some time at the end to
Yeah.
answer the questions.
I think that's very fair.
Very good. Again, please honor our ground rules, respect other people, and listen with good, knowing that people are voicing things that are important to them, so we just want to make sure we listen. Oh, thank you. And yes, when you come up to the microphone, if you would tell us who you are, that would be really helpful. So we'll turn it over to you.
My name is Kathleen Minio. My husband, David Quigley, couldn't come tonight. He's in healthcare, and so he was needed to work. But I really don't have anything to add. I just want to thank the CAT committee for doing such a fabulous job. I've been really informed tonight on so many things. I guess my question is, what use and what good will the public, do we have any chance to stop this from happening? I'm pretty scared for me, my children who grew up in Fort Collins, and my grandchildren. It seems hopeless. And although I'm a mile as a crow flies from the plant and not downwind, I'm still concerned for Fort Collins. This is not Fort Collins that I know that would let this happen. And I know it isn't the city that's going to make that decision, but whatever we need to do, however we can help, we need to stop this from happening. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim Wade, and I live in Solar Ridge. I've been an asthmatic all my life. Came to Colorado 54 years ago so I could play basketball without playing more than 15 minutes and having to sit out the game. And I still have asthma. I have exercise-induced asthma. And I'll give you a little story. I didn't have anything in this game. I didn't have a dog in this fight. But about a month ago, I was driving north on Taft Hill Road just before the roundabout, and I got hit by the odors from this thing. I mean, it's very distinctive. Immediately, I went into an asthma attack, the quickest I've ever had in my life, 3 to 5 seconds. I was, it's an awful feeling if you've never had it. I've had adrenaline pumped into me before to keep me from dying, so I know the experience. I was looking for a whiff or an inhaler. I couldn't find one in my car. Fortunately, about a quarter mile to a half mile down the road where I turned into my subdivision, it ended. I caught my breath. I went in home, coughed for 15 minutes, got it all out of my system. What happens to people like me if I'm walking my dog and one of these big clouds comes over me? I may not have the ability to get somewhere. So if I end up in the hospital or dead, is Martin Marietta going to take care of me, or am I going to be in a lawsuit with them? Now, I'll just do this very quickly. I was part of the crowd up on County Road 80 that defeated Colorado Lean's attempt to put a mine in up there. This was about 20 years ago. They took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and they lost. We got 2 or 3 of our commissioners to go along with us, and we beat them. And I want to tell you, you can beat these people, but the county commissioners, where you're going to have to be, and you're going to have good evidence, and you're going to have people like me who've experienced the situation and have had the attacks, and then you've got a chance of beating it. That's all I've got to say.
My name is Willie Portilla, and I live in Poudre Overlook, which is the next neighborhood over. It's been hinted at before, but historically, these plants were never intended to be in urban environments. The city of Fort Collins has grown to become neighbors, and then now they brought this in. We smell it on a regular basis. We hear it all the time. The trucks are going in and out. It does not belong in an urban environment. And my question to the regulators is, how many of those 110 plants are within 0.3 of a mile from a school? I mean, that data should be available. I'd just like to know if any of them are that close to a neighborhood and that close to a school, because they don't belong in that environment. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aiden Levy. I live in Grey Rock, which is just northwest of Taft and Vine, so pretty close to the plant. I'm originally from New York, and I grew up with really, really bad asthma, spent a lot of time in the hospital, and I started coming out here in the summers when I was a kid, and my asthma was gone. Like, it didn't exist. And so it was wild going back and forth between the two. And eventually I decided part of the reason I moved out here was because my asthma I didn't have asthma here. And it's truly a different, you live in a different way. And about a little over a year ago, my asthma started to come back. And I didn't really understand why. You know, I figured it was body changing, maybe a diet. So I tried a few other things, didn't, change. And then actually I went traveling and I left for a while, and my asthma was gone again. and when I came back, it returned, and it's actually been getting slightly worse. So that's my bit in it, and I will consider moving again, because it's just, you can't live in the same way. So, thank you.
My name is Scott Ogden. I'm a resident in Solar Ridge, and just wanted to observe that the way that this asphalt plant moved into our neighborhood, basically with limited notice, as a temporary plant, has basically been like a Trojan horse coming in now that it's asking for permanent status. And it seems like that conversion of a temporary plant to a permanent status ought to come with a mandatory land use revision or review to go with that. And I don't see that being tied to this, and it certainly should be.
Thanks. My name is Brian Simpson. I live with my family about a half a mile from this facility, and until now it's been an ideal situation to raise our 5-year-old son. I wrote down my comments because I thought it was going to be a tight 2-minute window, so I'm going to stick with my script because I did the work. We've heard tonight how Martin Marietta plans to produce up to 475,000 tons of asphalt annually at the site, less than a half a mile from Lincoln Middle School, and how they will release up to 15 tons of carcinogenic VOCs and HAPs into the surrounding community. These emissions include benzene, a carcinogen linked to leukemia, nitric oxide linked to asthma, hydrogen sulfide, and heavy metals like cadmium, mercury, and lead. The Colorado Department for Public Health and Environment's mission statement is clear: to protect and improve the health of Colorado's people and the quality of its environment. There are 2,500 students attending 6 schools within a 2-mile radius of this facility. 7,000 residents live within that same area. Even if this facility is at or below EPA's annual threshold, the truth is we don't know the levels of toxins being released on any given day because there's no daily monitoring of these stacks. In fact, current air quality modeling does not take into consideration the topography of the area, the impacts of more than 300 truck trips a day traveling to and from the site, or even the long-term health impacts of carcinogenic VOCs being released into the community. Since we do know that cancer rates among asphalt workers are as much as 400% higher than the general population, it is absolutely imperative that we locate these facilities further from schools and residential areas. From the beginning, we've tried to engage Martin Marietta in a constructive and meaningful way, but we have not found them to be a reliable partner. They are unwilling or unable to answer simple questions about their daily emission levels. They have misleadingly compared their facility's toxic emissions to those of a bakery, and they respond to odor complaints by coming to your house and telling you that they cannot smell what you are very clearly smelling. If we can't trust them to acknowledge a smell, how can we trust them to regulate what's coming out of their stacks? CDPHE, we ask you to deny this stationary permit on Taft Hill and motivate Martin Marietta to work with city and county leaders to find a more suitable site. Plant officials have stated that it would cost just about $750,000 to move this portable facility, and it's been moved 20 times over the last 17 years. The current site is poorly situated, surrounded by a floodplain. It does nothing to promote your mandate to protect the health of Colorado's people. Please do the right thing and put public health before private profit. Thank you.
I'm Lauren Ogden. I live in Solar Ridge near the plant. I'm also a City of Fort Collins employee. I just want to kind of point out the political aspects of this thing. We taxpayers have paid for our beautiful bike trail, a big roundabout right on Vine Street, and we've also basically are paying about 50% of our tax, the Keep Fort Collins tax, a great tax, went to asphalt to fix our cities, roads, and other projects, and that came from Martin Marietta. So you're soiling your own nest if you allow this continue and have on the taxpayers' backs to have it basically spewing on those taxpayers. We really need it moved out of the area and to a place where there aren't as many people. And I know I'm voting that way.
My name is Julia Macmillan, and I live near the plant. And from what I understand from this meeting we have had here is that the permitting of a portable plant and a stationary plant are essentially the same, except for the modeling part, which was kind of showed some interesting things. Unfortunately, the modeling is just for CO, for short-term 8-hour production of CO. And it concerns me that the particulates, VOCs, hazardous air pollutant part of this, heavy metals, they're not being looked at as part of what this plant is producing as far as pollution is concerned. And it also doesn't take into account the fact that these things mix together, that sometimes other cocktails of these things can react and become even more dangerous. And the fact that it's located next to a school, I think, should demand that those sorts of things are looked at. It also doesn't really look at the fact that this could be up to 15 years of pollution for us. 15 years of being downwind under a toxic blanket because of the topography and because of the weather and the patterns of the wind. I just feel like that should be a larger part of what we're looking at here. And if we were to look at that, it very well may lead us to understand that this is just the wrong place for this plant. I understand we need asphalt. I understand it needs to be made somewhere, but not on top of a school. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Thanks so much.
Hello, I'm Lena DiCamello, and I live in Fort Collins. And being here today, I have lots of questions and took lots of notes as I listened. And one thing that would help me with the credibility of the information that's being provided is to get a few questions answered right here at this forum that I believe are pretty quick answers. The first one is, why move from a 2-year portable permit to unending, basically? Why is there no step up from maybe 2-year to whatever 5-year, especially if we're looking at standards that are from the 90s? It makes no sense to make such a huge leap to me. So that's a big question I would love to have answered today, and I invite anybody that can answer that question for me to speak with me after the meeting. Number 2, why are the same air quality standards in place for dense areas as urban areas? Speaking specifically to the schools, why are there the same air quality controls for areas where children are and are known to be, and in dense populations as in just general open air? Number 3, why was the permit not just issued as permanent when it was originally asked for if everybody felt that it was so safe to begin with? We all know in the back of our minds that there is a reason that it's only done for a 2-year permit, so that there is options to have it changed. And clearly, if there's options to have it changed, then there's a reason in the background to not allow that permit to go forward. I'd also like to know who in this room could tell me or explain to me how we could get a test done at Lincoln to verify that truly there's going to be toxic chemicals near that school. I still don't feel comfortable knowing that I know that answer 100%. Who can do that test? Who can pay for it? And how much is it going to cost us to do that? Why was this particular plant moved? I believe I heard 16 times. I could be wrong. But why has it been moved 16 times? Why hasn't another community seen this plant and said, oh gosh, we want this in our community, want it to stay? So I'm just asking, why have 16 other communities not allowed it to stay in place or worked to get it moved out of place? And then the last question I had was from an earlier speaker right before me, and they asked how many of these 110 plants that were mentioned to be in Colorado within 3/4 of a mile. I would love for somebody to answer that question for me tonight, since we have so many experts in the room, to tell me where I can find out this information and how it's available to the public so they can know exactly where asphalts are located near their neighborhoods. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Allen. I live in Solar Ridge near the plant, and I understand this asphalt plant was first permitted in 1996. Well, if any of you have been around here for a while, you might remember the feedlot that was out on East Prospect, and every time the wind blew from the east, it was quite a stench. And I don't ever remember smelling the asphalt stench from this plant before a couple of years ago. Some people have said it's been in other areas of the land now owned by Martin Marietta. Well, why didn't we smell it? I'm very concerned. We've had a couple of speakers talk about their asthma. I have a health problem that's not related to asphalt. I'm very allergic to milk. And it took me decades of ill health to figure this out. Now, is there going to be any monitoring of the 7,000 people living in this area of what their health is going to be in the future from all of these toxic compounds that will be emitted from the plant? It seems like there should be a public health monitoring of all of the citizenry in the area. We cannot ignore the external costs from having this plant so close to town. If it was originally permitted in 1996, things have changed. There's a lot more houses in the area. The population's gone up. And it seems to me that this plant should have been permitted as a new construction instead of sneaking it in on a temporary basis. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ellen Montague, and I live near Taft and Vine. Every morning, I drop my daughter off at Lincoln Middle School, and I walk my dog in the area behind the school. And every day when I walk, I sniff the air like every 10 feet. I'm smelling to see what I smell. And on several days, I have definitely smelled asphalt or a chemical smell. Today, I wasn't sure, you know, I was like, I didn't know whether I should call or not because it wasn't quite definite. And then the horses, I got next to the horses, and that was all I could smell. But, you know, I also talked to the principal, and I said, oh, you know this whole thing with the asphalt. And he said, oh, yes, I have the teachers trained when they go out to recess, you know, they should smell the air. And I thought to myself, how are we protecting our children if we're relying on the dog walkers and the teachers to sniff and see if the air is safe for our children to be in? And so neither solution, you know, I'm going to smell the air every day I walk anyway. You know, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to call the air quality people regardless. But our children, my daughter, really needs the commissioners, the people of the county to say, no, you know, the teacher's noses and my mother's nose isn't enough to protect me from what's happening. So I ask all of us to protect our children. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mona Thornton. I've got a son who went to Lincoln. I've got another one hopefully going there in another couple of years. I just want to say it seems interesting that they're putting this right behind one of the poorest schools in the city. We've got generally about 70% poverty rate there. They usually don't speak up. They can't afford health care. If they can't afford lunch, they usually can't afford health care. And it's just, Lincoln is sometimes a dumping ground. We've been working to change that image. It's a great school, but this is not going to help that image. And it kind of seems like we're just putting, sort of like a cancer alley, you know, where we're putting toxic things. This would be outrage if it were going in behind Fossil Ridge or one of the South schools. The room would be full. And so I just want you to consider that it's not a very vocal school, but it needs to be thought about.
Hi, my name is Heather Humphrey. I live south, a half a mile south of the plant, right where the air fumes would go, I guess, right near Lincoln. But I had a couple things that I'm kind of new to this whole controversy and kind of got late to realize what was going on. But I'm just curious, like, why would they put an asphalt plant right on the only, like, Colorado's only wild and scenic river? Like, to me, I don't understand that. And I studied epidemiology at CSU, and I don't know a lot about pollution in general, but I'm wondering if you live half a mile from a plant, what have the studies shown about the effects on people's health? I haven't looked it up, but I definitely will look it up and see if there's any studies that have been done to show the effects on people. And I also, every day, I don't have a job, and I sit at my house and I watch all these trucks, these 300, I mean, literally, there are so many trucks that go down this road, and not only do they go down the road, but they speed up Taft, you know, and it's just kind of, it's noisy and it's loud, and I think it is a good point about the pollution from the trucks. I don't know what, you know, that's interesting things to consider too, but thanks.
I'm Dr. Lucy Troop, and I'm here as a resident of Saddleback, which is the subdivision just in front of Solar Ridge. I'm also a cognitive neuroscientist, and I specialize in the effects of exogenous things in the environment on the brain. And I'm kind of astounded. The literature is really clear and really extensive about the effects that VOCs have on cognitive development. It's linked to schizophrenia, autism, through the nasal cavity to Alzheimer's, and developing the same physiological traits that you get with Alzheimer's and dementia. I'm kind of astounded. I've heard a little bit in previous meetings about the literature that's been used to suggest that there are no negative effects to the brain, but there really are, especially in developing brains in children. We know the prefrontal cortex, which is so important for high-level cognition, attention, emotion, ADHD, all those disorders come from deficits in the frontal lobes, are greatly impacted by VOCs, and they're still developing well into the late teens and early 20s. So I am flabbergasted, I suppose, is a word I'd use, that this is not more of an issue. And I want to just point out, there is no safe limit, and there are no safe chemicals when it comes to the brain. There's risk. Absolutely, there's risk, but there's nothing that can be considered safe. Even drinking water isn't safe. Thank you.
My name's Lance DeBar. I'm a concerned citizen, and I've listened to a lot of the arguments for and against, and I see this as being an equation of ignorance and convenience. And in ignorance, it's not knowing. It's actually, the root of ignorance is actually ignoring the facts and not doing anything about it. And with the obvious other factor involved with being convenient to perhaps keep this asphalt company where it's currently situated. And that is maybe the formula you're going to have to deal with. And Emma Goldberg had this really wonderful quote saying that the most, well, if she used violent element, but violent element in society is ignorance. And I just see it as being one of those situations where there is a possibility to relocate. I think the people that have spoken really want this to happen and are really behind this happening. And lastly, and with all due respect to the people that work at Marietta, I feel like consciously, could you feel good about that? You know, do you feel good about it? And there is a possibility for it to be relocated, albeit inconveniently, but it can be, and that's maybe that third article of good intent, what this forum is really used for. Wouldn't that be good intent on behalf of the city and the company and the people? And that's, I think, where, as just a layperson, seeing it, witnessing the arguments for and against it, I feel like that would create a really nice harmony.
Good evening. My name is Ray Guzman, and I have a house next to Martinez Park, but mainly it calls my attention over the years that I had two kids specifically went to Lincoln as well. And at the same time, I work around kids. I work for the district here. And I am really concerned, and it will be really important for the community that I represent, directly or indirectly, as a Spanish-speaking families and population in the north and northwest of Fort Collins specifically, to have this information, if it is possible, translated in Spanish, and among other languages as well. I'm not saying Spanish only, but at the same time, I am really concerned for other speakers, and I really feel for each of you, and I hope that this matter can be taken care of. That's when we have within the political arena, we have good representatives from the city, from the county, state, that will help us. And at the same time, I will like to invite my bosses, the PSD representatives. I haven't seen anybody, and I happened to find out about this meeting today. So that would be something that it might be taken into consideration. Thank you so much.
So yes, first, Mr. Isman, we certainly apologize for not having any materials in Spanish, but I know we're going to be doing that as one of the things the FAQs were put up, or however you want to explain that, and I assume we'll try to do something with the slideshows also to see what we can do about getting them also in Spanish. And I think it's a good point made. A number of the schools, whether it's Lincoln or other schools in Northwest Fort Collins, have a substantial number of Hispanics who go to those schools. So we'll certainly take that. And again, I apologize for not having done a better job with that. So one of the things, I was wondering, maybe if you guys could just stand up and go over there, and I want to just ask you a couple questions just for some of the facts, if we can get some facts out. Or you can hold the mic and hand it back and forth. And there were a number of points and questions, but again, the biggest one is your comments need to go to those folks when the draft permit is issued in those 30 days. But one of the questions is, and I wasn't clear, so can you only written comments, or can you go on the website and give a comment? Because I wasn't clear what's the answer there when the draft permit comes out.
You want to provide us with written comments.
So you have to send a written comment, and they have to be received by a certain date, postmarked by a certain date, or what?
They need to be received by midnight of the last day of the public comment period.
Okay, and then can they be?
And you can't email them to us, but in written form.
Can people hand deliver them if they want to an office? And that address is on the site, I assume?
Absolutely, and the address will be provided. You can email them. So in written form, you can email them, and the website for that address will be as part of the public comment.
So you can send an email, either in the text of the email or as an attachment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's good to know, because it wasn't clear what written meant exactly. So one of the ones, from what I heard, could you address some of the permit issues as to the 2-year permit versus the longer permit now, and why that's occurring? Or the question, I mean, they're requesting a longer permit.
Yeah, so our rules allow, kind of recognize the fact that certain types of operations, for example, hot mix asphalt plants, do move around as part of their normal business functioning to supply, asphalt, or in other cases, aggregate or road materials, and those projects, can move around. So our rules do allow for us to permit portable sources, but those portable sources are limited to 2 years at a location, and then if they're going to stay beyond that, we then consider them to be permanent at that location, and then the companies have to apply to revise their permit from portable to permanent. And then with our construction permits, those are good indefinitely. They don't have limits in terms of timing. There's been a few references to 5-year renewals. The permit renewals only apply to those operating or major source permits, not to synthetic minor permits like what is being proposed here. So they have to resubmit information about their emissions every 5 years on that APEN or APEN form, but they don't have to renew their permit every 5 years. Only those major sources have to do that.
Okay, and do you have any idea, or is there any information on your website where folks could find out for the 110 other similar permits, how many are close to schools, or with this distance from schools, or other locations where people congregate?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I was thinking about it. I know several people made that comment. We have a large inventory of all those sources. We do have some mapping tools on our website, but I don't know that there is a capability to search for, just for example, asphalt plants. You can search by area and look at all the air pollution sources in that area, but I don't know of a good way off the top of my head, and we could ask, if somebody makes that comment, we could ask our inventory people that track all this stuff if they know how to do it. Kirsten, do you have any thoughts on our databases other than the mapping tool, which is area specific?
No. The other thing that we don't have is we don't have the schools identified in our databases. So trying to tie those two together, unless you know the area of the school, would be difficult to get the sources near that school.
So, but people could ask that question and concern, and potentially one could end up doing, somebody could do that analysis as part of the concerns.
Yes.
Okay. The other, dealing, one of the questions was very specific, so, and you can answer it, maybe it was Melissa or Lucinda, but the question about the concern of what the pollutants are at Lincoln in particular, being the closest school, how does one determine what that is? And who does it? And how much does it cost? Well, that's what I heard.
Okay, trying to get all of those, and if I miss one, please let me know. We do monitoring at various areas, and there are monitors in the Fort Collins area. However, we don't monitor at specific locations. So if a specific location needed to be monitored, that would be something that either individuals would do or the city or county government. That's not something that we would do as part of our mission. So
Lucinda,
we wouldn't have that kind of information.
So Lucinda Smith is in charge of our environmental services, and Melissa works with her, so she's a good person to address this.
Thank you. I don't have a complete answer yet, but I think it's a good question. And there certainly are tools and portable monitors that could be brought to schools. And so it would be a matter of identifying what would be the pollutants that would be of interest to be measured, developing a cost estimate, and then determining a location or a possible source for paying for it. I mean, it's something that can be done. I think that Melissa would probably agree with that. And the question is, what would be the scope and how much would it cost? So we can look at least developing a proposal, and then how it would be funded is another question.
And I assume that would be part of the analysis that the city and county is doing on the draft permit, taking a look at some of the issues, and that would be something that you folks would be looking at, then making recommendations, the county folks to their folks and the city folks to us, correct? Okay, another one just, so one of the comments, and I think you can answer this one, why the asphalt plants moved. Well, asphalt plants tend to be located close to where there's aggregate and where there's a need. So plants, if you remember a few years ago, when Cameron Pass was being done, folks were farther away from Cameron Pass, but then they had a couple spills, actually, of the asphalt going into the Poudre River, and the plants then had to be moved much closer. So asphalt plants, the portable ones, do move around where the need is, where there's work to be done. To my knowledge, there's nothing nefarious about them moving. It's just something that happens in that particular business. And then the change here is because they have had it here 2 years already, and they're asking to have it here longer make it a permanent plant, whatever that means. So a number of questions or comments were made about the truck traffic. So, and the pollutants from the trucks which are being generated from the activity at the plant. So does your department look at that issue at all, or how does that get factored in?
Yeah, so what we do is we do regulate a couple things. We do from mining operations and activities that have a lot of truck traffic. We do consider those emissions. Typically, the most significant emissions is the dust that's generated by the tires as they contact the road. It's a pretty significant source of particulate matter emission, so that is permitted, although we permit stationary sources, so we only look at the on-site vehicle traffic, and then we don't regulate tailpipe emissions coming out of either cars or trucks. There's federal standards for that, and it's based on model year and all those kinds of things, and we don't specifically regulate it. To answer the question about, were those emissions considered in the modeling analysis we did for carbon monoxide, we feel they were, based on the type of modeling run we did. We pulled, the primary source of carbon monoxide emissions is from vehicles. It's not from stationary sources, although they obviously contribute. But the majority, and the reason why, back in the 70s, Colorado had exceedances of carbon monoxide, including in Fort Collins, is because primarily because of vehicle traffic. And tailpipe emissions, obviously cars over the years have gotten a lot cleaner, so we've seen in general carbon monoxide monitoring to be lower. To one point in Kat's presentation, and I can't answer this, but just something to consider is, they talked about, kind of the topography, and, for example, you're right, we see higher ozone values at the Fort Collins West monitor, but the things that lead to ozone formation and ozone transport aren't necessarily the same as, carbon monoxide. So I don't think, we have experts that all they do is this kind of stuff. I'm not one of those experts. And, if we receive written comments, we certainly will involve those experts in our response. But just something to keep in mind, the formation mechanisms of pollutants and where they travel and where they go aren't necessarily the same pollutant by pollutant. And ozone is formed more regionally and involves a much larger mixing, if you will. And then there's, we have people that, like I said, do this, every day of the week and, predict ozone concentrations and issue air quality warnings and all that kind of stuff, and they're well versed in it, and probably if we receive those comments, we'll have them help us respond to them.
Okay. There's two other sets of questions, or basically two questions. One deals with the model, the other deals with mitigative measures if the plant goes forward. So if you could, and I saw you write those down, the mitigative measures, Dr. Pass's recommendations. But dealing with the model, Dr. Pass made it brought up a number of issues. Bias towards winter, it was it was a non-arid climate. The background CO was for downtown Fort Collins, et cetera. If you could address some of those or all of those.
I'll try, and I'll unfortunately be able to only talk about them in general terms. We have a group of scientists that run these models, and once again, that is their focus. I work on the permitting side, so when we do one of these analyses, I don't have the skills to run it. I would be lost, and you get in discussions with them, and in about 5 minutes your eyes start glazing over because they're so detailed about it. But in general terms, we ran a model called AirScreen, which is an EPA-approved model. We used the data, as you said, from background from the Fort Collins downtown, and we feel that's conservative because there's more vehicle traffic in an urban environment typically than you see in less urban environments. So we feel that those concentrations were conservative and were appropriate to use as a background.
And you're talking about there's the monitor at Laurel and College is what you're talking about?
I believe so. They told me it was downtown Fort Collins.
So there's two monitors, one on the west side of town.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right. I don't think we monitor CO at the other location, only downtown.
Okay. And then the other issues?
Yeah, so Kirsten, I'm going to hand you the mic, and I'll go get the list and see if I can talk about some of them.
On a lot of these modeling issues, as we get those comments from folks in the public comment period, we will bring our modelers in to help answer those questions. So please add those comments to the public comment period, and we'll have the people that do modeling for a living provide those answers. We're going to try and provide more the general answers that we can, but you'll get a much better answer from the folks that do modeling as part of their jobs. So include those comments in the public comment period.
Okay, and Roland, if you could try to address some of the recommendations that Dr. Pass made.
So I think I was writing quickly, so I might have mischaracterized some of these. I think some of the recommendations that were made regarded stack testing. We're looking at stack testing, and once again, the draft permit hasn't been finalized, but particulate matter, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, because there's a relationship between nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxide typically in any combustion process. And then there was a particulate matter standard in the federal, what we call new source performance standard. In terms of your request, we'll have to look at that in terms of some of the other pollutants. Typically for synthetic minor sources, usually the stack testing we require is typically a one-time stack test to show compliance after permit issuance. Major sources typically then have more ongoing requirements, but synthetic minor and true minors typically most often are a single time, so we'll have to consider that comment. In terms of the limited hours, sometimes we do impose those restrictions on mining or even potentially asphalt plants if there's a modeling issue. In this case, based on our analysis, there wasn't. I agree they were very close to the 8-hour standard, just slightly below. One thing to consider when we modeled it, because it's a 1 hour and an 8-hour standard, we look at max emissions for either 1 hour or 8 hour. So in all honesty, the 600,000 tons versus 475 wouldn't matter because we're modeling max emissions over that 8-hour period. So, and we do that based on the capacity of the unit. So in this case, unless they had a modeling issue, and you're right, there's winter time, there's calm conditions. I'm honestly going to have to get some answers from our modeling experts to really be able to respond, in a meaningful way to that.
Okay. And so just two quick ones. One is, do the public comments especially affect whatever the mitigative or the requirements are, as some of the things Dr. Pass suggested? Have those historically had any effect on what finally is issued in the final permit?
Yeah, they have had some effect. I know sometimes people feel the public comment process is frustrating because by the time we get to issue a draft permit, we've done all our review, we've done all our analysis, and we believe that the permit is going to meet all the appropriate regulations, and we put in conditions to substantiate that. We do receive public comment, and we do make revisions to permits based on that public comment, but I think sometimes the thing that's confusing is by the time we get to the point where we've drafted a permit, we're pretty far down the road, and we believe that plant is going to meet all the standards. So oftentimes, people I think are frustrated maybe within our process that they don't have more input on the front end.
Okay, and then actually Representative Fisher had just a question for Martin Marietta if they wanted to make any comments from what's been said tonight. And that was their choice. Okay, I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight, how respectful everyone's been, the comments, the questions. I think the state got a very good idea of what some of the concerns were, and hopefully the draft permit, since that's what we've learned, will reflect some of those concerns and issues that have been brought up.
Could we get a copy of the
Yes.
presentation?
You'll get a copy of everything. We'll get
Great.
a copy. We have some other comments that were here, and they will be also included. So we'll be working with you to answer any of these or other things from tonight.
Excellent.
And
Thank
so
you.
this will ultimately all be posted, as well as if you left your email, I'm sure we're going to be emailing things or where the site is, et cetera, to get those out. And again, the Spanish issue, and I think would probably make some sense, I'm just saying as one council member, that we probably do some outreach to PSD, especially Lincoln and some of the other schools in the area, to make sure citizens are aware of this particular issue. I just want to, again, thank everyone for coming, and have a good evening.